Oh, greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. It is I, AfroMandias, back with another video today. It's been a while since I've uploaded a video or even talked to the camera. A lot's been happening, lots been going on. Got myself a new living space. It's a long story. I'm back with another video today, and in my last video, I had mentioned that I was bringing up a new series. Yes, a new series. It was called either Creating a Champion or Building a Bastard. Okay, so stick with me. If you saw my last 4 videos, I essentially went over my history and the universes that I've created and the characters that reside in them. I didn't go too much in depth with it. Again, I sound like a broken record, but I, you would have to make time for an entire day for me to go over what happens in these stories, for one, and for two, I don't really have everything written down. I'm still kind of working on some things, kind of ironing it out, but eh, hair in my mouth, wonder where that came from. But anywho, again, just trying to trust the process and allow me to take up some of your time today. Today is going to be a little bit of a shorter video, not going to be going into an entire universe, but instead we're going to be focusing on a character today. A character that means a lot to me, but in a sense of it was one of my first aha kind of moments. It was basically a character where I heard something and I was like, that's it. This is perfect. And if you know who that character is, I mentioned him in my very first video. So today we're going to be talking about one of my first ever villains that is present in this entire series. I guess you could say the universes that I have is, the king of desolation and the king of absolution himself, Cinderella-Man. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how I built this beautiful bastard and essentially what his quirks are, why he's the way he is, where he comes from, and what his fate is in the series. So without further ado, just kind of sit down, relax. If you're studying, I know, we're kind of in school right now. So, if you want to listen to this as background sound, then, anything's better than nothing. So just let Papa Afro entertain you for the next couple of minutes. And again, thank you for your time and thank you for your patience. So let's get started. Cinderella-Man, also known as King Null, was originally a king of an agricultural planet known as Gahahi. Trying to figure out how to spell that, but Google Translate will come in clutch for me. But essentially, there's not much to know about his people or his origin. He is essentially just one of the races that kind of make up the galaxy that is present in the Great War saga, the saga that holds most of, if not all of our characters that we're going to meet in their own stories. But there's not a lot to know about him. We don't really go in depth into his childhood, but he was raised to be an honorable and great man, a great warrior, a great leader. And I say warrior, but I want to take a step back and say that they aren't really fighters. They're an agricultural planet. They're more pacifists. And in fact, they've come to a point where it's like, we do not want anything to do with this war. We're willing, think of them as like America. If George Washington was still around, he would want America to be more of a, isolationist, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm saying that right. But essentially, it's more or less, they do not want anything to do with this war, but, if they're willing to trade some goods and services and whatnot, they're willing to do that. They don't have any sides. Think of them as like Switzerland during all the wars. They stayed neutral. They didn't, as long as you give them something, they're willing to give you crops and stuff like that, or like food. But, for the most part, they wanted nothing to do with the Great War. So for Cinderella-Man, what's his biology? So he's known as an Akoji. Again, I'm still kind of reframing and trying to figure out how, because I know I said Agahi, but it's Akoji. I'm trying to figure out the name for it. It's because I already kind of have a bunch of names for all these other races that I have. So he's just more or less he has more plant-based biology, so he's a lot more, you know, he doesn't really have any bones, and he has, it's hard to explain, but he's more of like, for his people, how they grow and how they reproduce is kind of interesting. So think of it like this, right? So when the mommy and the daddy love each other very, very much, they kiss, but and it only takes about maybe 3 to 5 weeks digestion time before the female is fully pregnant and is about to give birth, right? So essentially, what they do is that they dig themselves a hole, a diggy hole, and the lady Akoji, sits herself down in there and essentially buries herself. She is fed. She's accompanied and make sure that she's taken care of by her like people and friends and whatnot in the like village. But then when the child is born, she is birthed. She births out the child, but it starts off as a seedling. She has to stay in the ground in order to keep, make sure that her and the seedling are okay, and that will take about another 2 weeks time and whatnot. Again, it's not like a big kind of thing, and again, I'm still kind of working on this. And again, it's not really an important notion about how these characters come into existence, but most of my characters are humanoid anyways, so it just kind of gives a little more like juiciness, I guess you could say, to how they come about, because at the end of the day, they are technically just walking plants. So think of them like the Pikmin from the Pikmin series in a weird sense, except they're more humanoid. But when the child is fully, when it like gets its like normal baby body, there's a ceremony that is held place, and basically the wife or the mother and the child bring it to King Null, and King Null gathers everyone around on the planet and lets them know that there has been another child to be born, and it's a full celebration, a worldwide event, because this happens. They live for a long time anyway, so childbirth, not to say that there isn't childbirth that is present all the time, but when it comes about, it's a big deal, because they love life. They're on an agricultural planet. They love any sort of life, whether it's birth of their own, birth of their crops, birth of their animals that they're taking care of. They love life. They love it. They love it so much, and they celebrate. So essentially, how like the Lion King kind of comes about, in the morning, it's like the sunrise, and you hear the buzz of it. It's kind of similar to that, where King Null has the baby and he kind of shows it to everyone. Everyone's like, wow, yeah, and it's a whole big celebration. But that's kind of like the idea that I'm kind of going with, is that these are kind of more traditional, old-fashioned agricultural people who just want nothing to do with this war. So let's talk about King Null himself. King Null is an interesting individual, because he himself, he knows what's going on, and he just refuses to get involved. And that's for the better, because one, his people can't really, they're not warriors. They're not people who can just pick up a weapon and just go into war. They're gardeners. They don't know how to fight. They know how to plant and whatnot. So he doesn't want anything to do with this war. However, just because you don't want anything to do with the war does not mean that you are not going to get involved in it. So unfortunately, not to say tragedy strikes, it will strike, but again, this is kind of what happens is that a Jurian, if you know my last video, these are the giant dinosaur people. The one of their ships, they were in like a dogfight with a couple of Jury Rays. Again, I mentioned that in my last video, but they got into a dogfight, and one of these ships resided King Adam, who is Alva's father. who was the king of the Giants at the time. So they got into a dogfight and they landed on King Null's planet, and King Null was like, "Get off!" he knows how brutal and brutish the Jorians are, and he said, "No, we do not want anything to do with you. Gather your resources, get out, go." Like, he wanted nothing to do with them, but his wife, still think of a name, but his wife wanted to help them because she realizes, that they're hurt, they're trying, at least let them have a fighting chance to leave instead of just, letting them get off the planet and licking their wounds and whatnot. He unfortunately agrees to this. He does love his wife and he loves his children, so he keeps them far away from the, not to say prisoners, but essentially the, residents, the temporary residents that are residing on this planet. So a lot of interactions happen, a birth of a child happens, they do the ceremony and whatnot. King Adam is really angry because Jorians have this code of honor where it's like, either you're going to have to kill me or I'm going to kill you. They fight to the death. They are a warrior race who, it's like either I'm going to die or you're going to die, or it's going to be both ways. So he feels ashamed because he lost a dogfight, but he didn't die. But now he wants the attention of the Jury Rays that attacked him in the first place. So what he does is that he, him and the rest of the Jury Rays, some of the Xerxians that were on the ship as well, some of them were scientists, and they were, you hear that was just my roommate, he's taking a shower, which is like, what time is it? It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. More power to him. But back on the topic, so some of them were able to fix up the ship to where it was at least somewhat functional to where they can leave. But, with King Adam being such a hard-headed, hardened warrior, he says, no, we want them to bring the fight to us. It's like, no, that's not a good idea. This is, their plan is like, no, this isn't our planet, and whatnot, so I don't care for these people. Again, still kind of ironing some things out and whatnot, but, essentially he sends out a signal that is transmitted across the stars, and this catches the eye of the dogfight, of the Jury Rays that had the dogfight with him in the first place. So then they go back to the the message was sent, except they bring reinforcements, a lot of reinforcements. So a big fight happens. I'm not going to go in depth because I don't really want to, it's essentially a world-ending event where one of the Jury Rays ships had this thing called the Star Imploder, and to keep in mind, this planet was as big as, this planet was so big it had 2 suns. Keep that in mind. We only have 1 sun and it's bigger than us. So imagine having a planet that is so big that it has 2 suns. That makes no sense, but it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of cool, right? I thought it was kind of cool. It has 3 suns. Make it even cooler. Even though it's a sun. The sun's hot. It's hot. Anywho, it's so basically this planet is blown to smithereens. And it's very sad because at the end of the day, if they had left early, they probably wouldn't have had this kind of travesty on their hands. And that's not to say that it's the wife's fault, because the wife is kind of the voice of what the Akoji people are. The Akoji people believe that all life is sacred, no matter how dangerous that one can be, is that they were given life for a reason. So, at first, King Null was against this because he knows who they are, but he listened to his wife because she's right. By their code of conduct and how they live is that yes, all life is sacred. So he said he softened up a bit and he said, all right, we'll take him in, but at that cost, it cost him not only his family but also his planet and his people. And although I had mentioned this in my last video, obviously, so you guys kind of know how this ends. Basically, he wanders his desolate planet looking for any sort of survivors, but it's destroyed. There's no one left but him. He wanders, he finds his wife holding their unborn child in her arms as they're covered in the soil. He tries to revive them, but he doesn't. He can't. Tears circle down his eyes as he looks around, trying to find a modicum of life, but all of it is gone. He is the only one who's left. And to that, he thinks to himself, why me? Why did I survive while the ones that I love and care about didn't? So he wanders and he doesn't understand why he was the only one left. He wanders until he can't anymore. His legs are on fire. His lungs are filled with soot and ash that coated his planet, and he just couldn't go anymore. So as he kneels on the ground, he looks up to the skies and he cries out to his gods, wondering why this happened to him. Why is he the only one left? Why couldn't the destruction take him with his people? And when he didn't get an answer, he did one last thing before he finally succumbed to his wounds. He cursed those who had wronged him, who he had given a sacred home to, a place to where they can nurture and lick their wounds before leaving. And as he fell to the ground, you know how the story goes. A red crimson lightning bolt strikes down on his back. It shocks him, but it doesn't wake him up yet. It leaves a burnt sea mark on his back. Fiery, hellish flames engulf the sea as it sears into his back. He still lies on the ground, motionlessly, until his eyes open. But there's nothing there. It's black. It's pitch dark. It's empty. Until a circular red dot filled with blood pierces through it. Pierces through the darkness. As he gets up, King Noel is finally dead, but is born the king of absolution himself, Cinderella-Man. And that's basically the origin story of Cinderella-Man. His ideals is that, at this point, what is there left to fight for? He has nothing. He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have friends. He doesn't even have a planet he calls his own. What is a king to a throne of dirt and ash? But nothing but dirt and ash. King is nothing without his throne, so can you even call him a king? What is he then? Is he just some wandering beast who needs to let out his anger? What is he? Well, I'll tell you. He's a spirit, an unyielding spirit of vengeance, of violence, of danger, of war, of corruption. He could be anything. But one thing is for sure. He is going to come back for his revenge. And that's basically the idea of what Cinderella-Man is that he is the opposite of what King Noel is. A person who, has nothing, and a person who seeks violence, who acts instead of waits. I also like to think of him as a foil to Andreas. I think I'm using that story term right, is that he is what Andreas would have been if Andreas went down a dark path. Now I'm gonna save this for when I talk about my creating a champion video when I go over Andreas, which will probably be the next video. But essentially, Cinderella-Man's case is that he is a man who has lost everything, and instead of taking this second chance of life and using it to find a new home or try to rebuild something, he is filled with so much anger and so much regret and just filled with violence that he chooses to put that anger and death upon those who've wronged him, even those who were innocent, unfortunately. So, again, that's not to say that Cinderella-Man isn't without reason to do this, but at the same time, a lot of innocents are caught in the crossfire, just as innocents on his planet were caught, unfortunately. So that it kind of gives more of a sympathetic angle to Cinderella-Man, because put yourself in Cinderella-Man's shoes. If you had lost everything, you had nothing, where would you go? You know who did it to you, and you have the power to beat the snot out of them. Would you do it? Would you use that power to give in to your darkest desires and take out the pain that you feel onto others? Or would you rather be a symbol of hope, be a symbol of freedom and a symbol of redemption? That is a question that always digs into the back of my mind every now and then, is that if I was given superpowers, what would you be? If one day you were just given the abilities of Superman, how would you use those powers? Would you be a superhero? Would you just keep going on about your life? You just so happen to have these powers? Or would you rule the world? I don't know. So a lot of people would say that would try to rule the world because innately, humans are inherently selfish creatures. I have selfish desires. Not to say that I would rule the world or anything. Me personally, I would try to use my powers to just fly across the ocean, because honestly, that looks cool, and whatnot. But back on topic, Cinderella-Man's case is just very interesting to me, because he is someone who just, he was one of my first like aha kind of characters. I kind of had mentioned this in my last video, but I remember just listening to the song of Eminem. I know he's kind of wishy-washy these days. I know that some people think he's corny and whatnot. He does have some good songs, and I wouldn't put him in my like top 5 favorite artists, but he's definitely around in the top 10. But anywho, I remember listening to the Cinderella-Man song because I had the idea of Cinderella-Man. I just didn't know where or what name to give him. So it was just kind of this dude who lost his home and his friends and his people and whatnot. I couldn't think of a name, but the idea of the Cinderella-Man is actually excuse me, it's also based off the idea of basically going from rags to riches. The Cinderella-Man is also a story. It's also a movie. I think it's Russell Crowe who stars in it. It's a really good movie. But it's basically about a poor boxer who becomes like famous or infamous in some eyes, as being one of the best boxers in the world. And just the idea of the Cinderella is just really cool to me. The idea of getting a second chance or going from rags to riches is just really, it's basically an underdog story if you truly think about it. Because if you look at it from an outside perspective, King Null, if he was ever placed, like if his people or himself was ever placed in the Great War, would have been wiped out immediately. Point being that he lost his planet, due to the like forces of the Jurians, the Xerxians, and the Jury race. But with him losing all that, he gains a new power, a power that is able to topple armies, destroy planets and stars with ease. That basically is the force that unites the those who were in the Great War, the Elementals, the Jury Rays, the Jurians, and the Xerxians. They have to put their differences aside and say, he's a bigger threat, we got to take him down. So, Cinderella to me is more or less an underdog story, a story from someone who started from nothing, who now has everything. But in this case, for Cinderella-Man, it's a man who had everything, but now has nothing, thus has nothing to lose. And if that's one of the most scariest, that's one of the scariest things to me, is finding someone who has nothing to lose. Because at the end, what are you gonna do? You know, like, they have nothing, so they're gonna do everything in their power to make sure that they take you down. But that's, with all that being said, Cinderella-Man. Let's talk about his abilities right quick, because he, you know, with him being in a koji, they're plant-based, like, they're plant-based, right? They're agricultural. So he has some ability of controlling plants. He doesn't really use it that often, but he can transform his body into different roots and plants and stuff. So, he can do that. He can stretch his limbs. That goes into the, like, plant aspect about him. He also has the ability of, like, super strength, super speed, durability, yada yada yada, the whole stuff. He can shoot lasers, and he has the power of the Cinderella spark, which that's what gives him those abilities. But that's kind of just the idea of where I'm kind of trying to go with this series. It's not going to be a very long amount of videos. Maybe some videos are going to be longer than others, but it's not going to be taking over 2 hours to explain it, because it's just going over one character, what their ideals are, where they came from as, concepts and whatnot. It didn't really take me too long to kind of figure out the design I wanted for Cinderella-Man. He is based off, he, like, looks and whatnot, he is based off, like, Majin Buu from Dragon Ball. He does have that similar look, and that's because he has that little loop thing around him, and I just kind of like that. Also, there's one character in Star Wars I remember, he has, like, I think it's two, like, it loops around him, and I just think that looks really cool. It's like an aesthetic design, almost kind of looks like a, what is it, like, not a crown, but like something that they can wear and it, like, drapes around their neck and something like that. I don't know what to call it, but it's something akin to that. Again, this video isn't going to be too long. I'm just kind of going over how I envision this character and what this character means to me, and just kind of the ideals that they have and possess and what role they play in the story. So finally, let's kind of talk about the role that Cinderella-Man plays in the story. He is essentially the main antagonist. That's kind of, for a story that focuses on war. Again, there's not really good guys or bad guys in war. They're just people doing their jobs. Of course, they're bad people in war. I'm not trying to say that all people are, good people and whatnot, but again, war doesn't determine who's right, it determines who's left. And again, winners of wars tend to write history books. Remember that. But with with everything being said, he is the main antagonistic force that kind of is, present in the Great War saga. He doesn't start off as the main antagonist at first. In fact, there's not really a antagonist. It's just kind of Andreas and David kind of going on down to the sites and seeing, like, what's going on. They were arbiters sent from Earth to investigate what's going on. It was basically a suicide mission to kind of see, like, what these aliens were capable of. But when the whole tragedy struck on King Noel's planet, that's when Cinderella-Man's born, and that's when he becomes a big threat. No one can stand up against him. He's just too strong. He's too durable. But Andreas, with him having a star shard inside of his afro pick, this kind of attracts Cinderella-Man, and is like, you have a power that's similar to me, and that intrigues me. So obviously Andreas and Cinderella-Man have this rivalry that's going on the side as well. So, you know, that's kind of the role that he plays. He doesn't really, he obviously wrecks house when he comes, but then he kind of, when Andreas and him have their first bout, he realizes that he, is kind of, he sees that Andreas isn't at his full potential yet, so he just kind of, he gives up and turns himself in. He's in prison for a little bit. This kind of gives the guy, everyone in the ward, to kind of give themselves a chance to breathe. But then he breaks out, all heck breaks loose again, and then everything just kind of, if you know my last videos, you know what happens. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter video today. Just kind of wanted to get myself back into the groove of things. Again, I'm doing this without any sort of script. It's kind of been helping me out so far because I'm kind of thinking things on the fly, and it kind of helps get my brain juices a flowing and whatnot. So this is kind of me explaining and going over my first new series, building a bastard / creating a champion. And I'm really excited because excuse me, sorry, I have something going on in my throat. Pause. I need to give myself some vitamin C. But this, again, this isn't gonna be a really long video. I know I'm kind of reaching over 30 minutes now, but I'm gonna I'm gonna stop it right here because this is only the beginning. And again, at the end of it, Cinderella-Man doesn't really play a huge role because I'm not gonna spoil anything, but if you know, you know. But I'm really excited to start off this new series because, I've already finished off explaining all my universes. So if you want to check those videos out, I already have a playlist that goes from 1 through 4. That's just me introducing myself and explaining my 3 universes I created. But now, we're going to be going over, building a bastard and creating a champion. This is my first ever video entry into that series, and it's focusing on Cinderella-Man Case 1. Get ready for creating a champion. That'll be Case 2, Andreas Holmes. Other than that, stay fresh and stay frosty, Afrolytes. I'll see y'all next time.